Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend another 1,000 scrip with the Purveyor on 3-star ranged legendary weapons. And as always, I'll take a few moments to talk about each one, what makes it good, bad, or indifferent. So let's go on ahead and get started and see what the Purveyor has for us today. So for our first roll, we got a Hunter's Light Machine Gun, with the last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage and 90% reduced weight. So the Hunter's effect is not the worst of the Assassin, or the Slayer's effects, I'm sorry, in my opinion anyway, because it does at least have the utility of being able to get some extra damage against the Scorch Beast and the Scorch Beast Queen, just because they are considered animals. So it does have that going for it, but overall, I don't think most players are going to be keeping around a weapon specifically to deal with animals. There's not really that many times in the game where you're going to be hunting animals specifically, and if you've got a decent weapon, you're generally going to be able to handle those animals without needing a specific weapon for it. On the other hand, this weapon having 90% reduced weight, if you did want to keep a light machine gun, for example, around to deal with hunters, this would be a good one, at least for the first and third star because of it, with the 90% reduced weight on it. But at the same time, it's showing a weight of 8 pounds with the 90% reduced weight. I somehow don't think this thing weighs 80 pounds, so Bethesda, what's up with that? Anyway, the second effect, the last round of the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage, is basically like not having a second legendary effect at all, in my opinion, especially on a high ammo capacity weapon like this. As heavy guns go, the ammo capacity on the light machine gun is actually a bit low, but compared to rifles, pistols, shotguns, those sorts of weapons, it's very high. And it's also the kind of weapon that you can most definitely reload in between combats. So, you know, if you're clearing an area and you've got a little bit of downtime for a few seconds, you can go ahead and reload it. Most weapons you can do that with. That's not a problem. The only weapons that is actually a little bit of a problem with are the weapons that use either fusion cores or plasma cores. And that's because if you do that, then you're going to end up with a bunch of half or less filled fusion or plasma cores in your inventory, and that's just really not a good situation. So those weapons you don't generally do that with, but this one you could, so chances are reasonable that you're not even going to be firing the last round in the magazine all that often on a weapon like this if you do reload between combats, so it's basically doing nothing at all. So overall, this one is pretty much a dud. Let's see what else Murmur has for us today. Here we've got a 2-shot short 10mm submachine gun with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and hits having a chance to generate a stealth field. So the 2-shot effect is not one of my favorite effects overall. It does pair particularly well with the explosive legendary effect or weapons that are already explosive. But this weapon does not fall into either of those categories. The reason I'm not a big fan of the 2-shot effect is because, for one, it does add 25% damage to the weapon, which is not a whole lot, but, you know, it's not nothing, and it doesn't really cost you anything theoretically, but in practice, it divides the total damage of the weapon up between 2 shots, which means that you have to penetrate the target's armor twice. Against squishy enemies, that's probably not that big of a deal, but against enemies that have some pretty good damage resistance, in this case, or energy resistance if this had happened to be an energy weapon, then that is definitely a big drawback, because weapons that do, or attacks that do higher amounts of damage penetrate the armor more effectively than weapons or attacks that do less amount of damage. So, you know, by reducing the amount of damage you do in half and then having it go through the armor twice, you may actually end up with doing less damage than the original non-legendary version of the weapon. I haven't tested that. I'm sure that there's probably some cases where you would, some cases where you wouldn't, but overall, it's just not a good thing. And then on top of that, there is also a significant accuracy penalty for the 2-shot effect, which I don't like that at all. So definitely not a big fan of the 2-shot effect unless it's paired with explosive. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that's generally a great effect. This is my first script video after the Test Your Metal update has released, so I know that they made some changes to the way that VATS criticals work. So I'm still kind of testing things out. Overall, it feels like VATS criticals are generally doing less damage, and even if you spec pretty heavily into it, you're probably going to be doing less damage if you are a crit build. But even so, they're still worth going after. Just you're not going to be getting as much benefit from them as you were. At least that is my initial impressions. I'm still testing things out, and if I find that to be different, then I will definitely say so in a future video. But so anyway, the VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that may actually be a good way to help compensate for some of the lost damage there. And it's also important to remember that if they haven't changed it, because I haven't researched to make sure that they haven't, but as I understand it, the VATS critical hits are still bypassing all damage resistances. So that's still keeping them very powerful there. And then hits having a chance to generate a stealth field, that is... On a weapon like this, it's not really that effective because you can put a suppressor on this thing and just stay in stealth pretty easily if you are a reasonable stealth build with decent gear. So it's not really doing a whole lot for you in that situation. On other weapons, it might be more useful, but overall, I'm going to go ahead and consider this one another dud. So let's see what else we can get today. And we got another 2-shot weapon, this time a 2-shot snub-dosed with 44 pistol, with plus 25% damage while aiming, and 25% less VATS AP cost. So we talked about the 2-shot effect before. I'm not going to repeat everything I said there, just assume that that all applies here, because it pretty much does. This is not an explosive weapon, either because of the legendary effect or natively, so it's not really doing a whole lot for us there. The plus 25% damage while aiming, that's a great effect, especially if you're the type of player who prefers to, aim down the sights as opposed to using VATS. For myself, with a pistol, I would almost always use VATS, so I wouldn't get a whole lot out of this, but I'm sure there are players out there who absolutely would. And if you're, like I say, if you're the type of player who enjoys aiming down the sights, then that's just 25% bonus damage for playing the way that you like to play, so that's a great thing. Unfortunately, it does not synergize well with the third effect, 25% less VATS AP cost. You're either going to be aiming down the sights for that extra damage, or you're going to be using VATS for the less VATS AP cost. There is something to be said for a weapon that is versatile and can be used in different ways, but I would generally prefer a weapon that is more focused on one playstyle and synergizes well, all the abilities synergize well for that playstyle, and then if I want to switch playstyles, switch weapons, but to each their own. Overall, however, I would consider this one pretty much, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not exciting, so let's see what else we can get from Murmur here. And here we've got a Troubleshooters short pump action shotgun with 25% faster fire rate and +1 perception. So the Troubleshooters effect is probably one of the more useful of the Slayer's effects, just because there are definitely times in the game when you will be fighting robots and you know it, such as when you're doing the encrypted event or daily ops with robots in them or running nuke silos or whatever. So you're definitely going to be seeing robots on a regular basis if you're an endgame player who plays the way most endgame players do. And robots are not the squishiest of enemies, so getting some extra damage against them is definitely not a bad thing. The 25% faster fire rate, I haven't actually tested it out on the short pump action shotgun. I theorize it could actually increase your rate of fire noticeably on this in the same way that it did with the Alien Disintegrator, but the semi-automatic version, but I'm not sure, so I may have to test that out one of these days. Previously, I had always assumed that 25% faster fire rate was worthless on semi-automatic weapons, but I've found that on semi-automatic weapons that you do not already fire as fast as you can pull the trigger, it can increase their fire rate, so it can actually do something there. And then the +1 perception is not terribly exciting. It gives you a little bit more VATS accuracy, which is not a bad thing, but at the same time, it's not a whole lot extra. It's a single point to your special, so it's not doing a whole lot. It's not nothing, but it's definitely not particularly exciting. So this one I would classify as pretty mediocre, not terrible, but definitely not terribly exciting overall. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And this time, we got a Troubleshooters Crusader pistol with bashing damage increased by 50% and faster movement speed while aiming. So we talked about the Troubleshooters effect. Once again, it's one of the better Slayer's effects, but we're not going to go into super detail since we talked about it already. The bashing damage increased by 50%. In most cases, I consider to be very much like the last shot legendary effect, in that it's basically like not having a second legendary effect at all. The one major exception to that is the minigun. If you are going to put the Shredder mod on it, then the bashing damage second legendary effect is a very good one. This is not a minigun, so it's not really doing a whole lot for us here. The faster movement speed while aiming is also a bit of a dud, because if you've already got the speed demon mutation, that's really not doing anything for you at all. If you do not have the speed demon mutation, then it does do what it says, but I really don't think there's that many players running around the battlefield holding the aim button the whole time, so overall this one is pretty much a dud. I guess I could see a mid-level or low-level pistol character using this until they got their hands on something better for dealing with robots, but overall it's just not exciting. So let's see here if we can get something better. Well, this one's at least interesting. This one's a Juggernaut 50 cal machine gun with 25% faster fire rate and +1 agility. So the Juggernaut's effect is kind of the opposite of the Bloodied effect. It gives you more damage the higher your health is, up to a maximum of 20, I believe it's 25% extra damage at full health. Now, one of my viewers did tell me that there is a way that you can use the Juggernaut's effect with unyielding and low health stuff to get damage that's very, very close to bloodied weapons. I haven't really looked into how that works exactly, so I'm not sure about that, but in the base damage, the way it's, intended, I guess, by the developers to work, where I assume anyway, where it is just going to do more damage when your health is full, then it's definitely nowhere near bloodied, but it's also really not anywhere near some of the stronger full health effects like the Aristocrats effect or the Junkies effect. Both of those work at full health and they give 50% damage bonus instead of 25, so that's unfortunate. The second star on this weapon is very good. The 25% faster fire rate on a fully automatic weapon is just a straight up increase in damage per second. So that's great, especially on a heavy gun like this where you've got a good solid magazine size, 250 if I'm not mistaken on this. So you can just hold the trigger and let the rounds fly and get the damage in. So that's a great thing. The +1 agility is not terrible. It gives you a little bit more AP either for VATS or for sprinting. The 50 cal machine gun, it's definitely not the best weapon around for VATS, but if you are a heavy gunner and like using VATS, it's definitely one of the better heavy guns for that if you're going to be looking for something fully automatic in that regard. So I don't generally use the 50 cal in VATS that much myself on my heavy gunners, but I don't generally use VATS on my heavy gunners, so it's not the worst for it, though, because I have tried that out, and you'll still have to do a fair bit of aiming down sights or hip firing, but you will be able to use it fairly effectively in VATS, too, if you've got a good AP pool. But anyway, this one is definitely on the higher side of mediocre, maybe even on the lower side of good, because of that faster fire rate. That really makes this weapon a lot more powerful than it otherwise would be. It would just be better if it had a better first star, like Bloodied, Aristocrats, Junkies, AntiArmor, anything like that would be better than Juggernauts in my opinion. So anyway, let's see what else we can get. Well, there's my AntiArmor. And here we've got an AntiArmor Gauss pistol with bashing damage increased by 50% and breaks 50% slower. So the AntiArmor effect is, in general, one of the stronger effects. It's very, very situational, unlike a lot of the other effects. I guess they're all kind of situational, but this one more so because it really kind of depends on your build, because a lot of weapons, actually all weapon types except for shotguns, have a perk that you can equip that will give you some armor penetration with that weapon. And the armor penetration doesn't stack exactly. Like if you've got an anti-armor weapon with 50% armor penetration and you've got just for hypothetically speaking, you had a perk that gave you 50% armor penetration using that type of weapon, you would not have 100% armor penetration. It's just not the way it works. I believe it would be 75% because the first one would apply, you would half of their armor would remain, and then you would take away half of their remaining armor. But I could be wrong on the math on that, but it's definitely not just additive like in the first case where it would be 50% plus 50%. But that said, the biggest drawback with the anti-armor, really, in my opinion, is that it doesn't do a whole lot against squishy enemies, but at the same time, squishy enemies are squishy and don't need a whole lot of help to take them down in general. So I don't consider that to be a huge drawback. Unfortunately, this weapon has the bashing damage increased by 50%, second legendary effect. It's not a minigun, so it basically doesn't have a second star. The third star breaks 50% slower. It is not especially exciting in my opinion because it's not really that hard to keep yourself in repair kits if you do the score challenges, complete the scoreboard, do the end game events when they pop up and get the improved repair kits that way. It's just not that hard to keep your gear functional in my experience, so it's not a big deal. It helps, don't get me wrong. I don't think anybody really enjoys having to repair their weapons and armor, so it's definitely not bad, but I would prefer to find something a little more useful there. Probably 25% less VATS AP cost on this particular weapon, but overall, this one is, once again, pretty mediocre, but it's not tradable, so it's definitely going to be going back into the Scrip bin. So we got a few more polls here. Let's see if Murmur will give us something good to wrap the day up with. Well, not on this one. We've got a Berserkers Black Powder Rifle with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Berserkers effect, it's not as bad as it used to be because you are not getting the debuff if you do have damage resistance. It's just you're not going to be getting any extra damage if you do have significant amounts of damage resistance, which is not very significant. I think it's like 25 or 50 or something like that, and it basically eliminates the entire damage bonus from Berserkers. I don't remember the exact damage resistance number, but still, it's not high. So basically, if you want the benefit, you're not going to be able to use armor, or at least you won't be able to use armor unless it's broken, since broken armor will not provide you any damage reduction, but it will still provide you with whatever legendary effects that it has when you equipped it. So some interesting things you can do with the build there, but I really feel like the Berserkers build is a bit lacking. It needs some perks and things like what the Bloodied builds have to really make it shine, and it's just lacking those. The VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that is, I talked about that earlier, a great effect. It was much better before they changed the way VATS critical hits work. At least I think it was. It may be... I think that in raw damage numbers, it was better then, and it's worse now. Although for crit builds, it may be more desirable now. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out and such, but we'll see how things go. I'm still doing some testing. I'm sure a lot of other players are as well, so we'll see how that plays out. But this is definitely not a particularly exciting weapon, so I don't see that second star, even if it ends up being amazing, being something that turns this thing into a god roll or anything like that. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, it's not a bad thing, although it does not synergize at all with the second star because you're either going to be aiming down the sights to get that extra damage resistance, or you're going to be using VATS to get those critical hits with the extra damage. So it's one or the other. I talked a little bit about weapon versatility earlier. I do prefer a weapon that is more focused, so overall, this one I'm pretty much considering a bit of a dud, so we've got 2 more tries here. Let's see if we can get something good. Well, this one really isn't it. We've got an instigating M79 grenade launcher with plus 50% limb damage and hits having a chance to generate a stealth field. So the instigating effect does not do what it says on the box. It is not double the damage that you see on the damage card unless you have nothing at all affecting the base damage of the weapon. If you've equipped any perks, or if you have any mutations, any chems, anything at all that is boosting your damage with the weapon, then the number that you see on the weapon card is not the amount of damage that will be doubled. You will add plus 100% base damage of the weapon. It would be nice if the tooltip was a little bit more descriptive on that, but it is what it is, I guess. And on slower firing, heavy hitting weapons, it's still a very strong effect, but it's definitely not as strong as it used to be. And that is unfortunate, because I really don't feel like it doing true double damage was all that broken. Yeah, it allowed snipers to one-shot a lot of things with headshots and things like that, but, you know, that's kind of the way that playstyle should work. So, you know, whatever. Anyway, this weapon could be kind of interesting with it because it is a high damage, slow firing weapon, so getting some double damage on that first hit would be a good thing, and in many cases be able to take your enemy down. The drawback being that it's explosive, so its damage is going to splash onto nearby enemies, doing damage to them, which means that when you target them, they're not going to be at full health, which means that the instigating effect will not do anything at all. So, it's kind of interesting in that regard. Bit of a non-bow, but, you know, it's just the way things go. The plus 50% limb damage, I'm really not a fan of that second star because I really feel like if you want to cripple your enemies, then you're better off equipping the perks that give you a percentage chance to cripple the enemy's limbs and doing it that way. And I feel like it's just going to be a lot more reliable that way. It's not nothing, but overall, I think you're going to get the most benefit out of that second star on a low damage, fast firing weapons, where you might be able to cripple the enemy's limbs before they actually reach you and start beating on you or whatever. So overall, not terribly exciting there. Now, one thing that is interesting, the hits having a chance to generate a stealth field on this weapon may be the kind of weapon that, or the kind of effect that it might be able to keep you in stealth. I'm not really sure. It might require something more like the Flamer, where it's got a much higher fire rate and is constantly hitting things and constantly giving you a stealth field. Because I did have a viewer tell me that they were able to stay in stealth with a Flamer that had this third star without any real perks or anything dedicated to being a stealth build. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if the grenade launcher would work that way or not. I suspect not, but it could if each time the explosion hit something, it had a chance to trigger that effect. It might actually be pretty good. So, I guess I should test that out one of these days. I don't know if this is the weapon that I would really want to test that on, though. So, I might do some legendary crafting or just wait until I get a hold of something a little better. But I could always use this one, too. So, anyway, we've got one more roll here. So, let's see if we can end the day on a high note. And no, not really. Here we've got a 2-shot Gatling laser with the last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage and 15% faster reload. So we talked about the 2-shot effect before, and I'm not really going to go into that again. This is the third weapon we've seen in this video that has that effect. And everything I said about it before applies here. Unfortunately, also, this is a Gatling laser and not an ultrasight Gatling laser, which means that the damage that it's doing is significantly less, well, at least noticeably less than the damage that an ultrasight Gatling laser would do. So that's another strike against this particular weapon. The last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage. On a weapon with the ammo capacity of this, which I believe is 250 for a fusion core base without adding the I forget the name of the perk, the power user or whatever perk that allows you to double the duration of your fusion cores, you're pretty much never going to see that effect trigger. It's literally like not having a second star at all on this weapon. And then 15% faster reload. If you don't have the speed demon mutation, then on a weapon like this, it could be very useful because this is the type of weapon that you do not want to just reload whenever, because you'll end up with a whole bunch of half-used fusion cores in your inventory. So you will frequently find yourself reloading at inopportune moments with a weapon like this, and reloading faster in those situations is a good thing. Unfortunately, if you have the speed demon mutation, the benefit from that third star is fairly negligible. So it's just not doing a whole lot for you in that situation, and I think most endgame players will have the speed demon mutation, if nothing else, just because it's faster to more fun to run faster. So Unfortunately, we didn't really get much of anything good here again this week, but we'll try again next week. Please remember, if you enjoyed my content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost any money. And until next time, thank you for watching.